I'm calling the hearing to order at 5:35. It is January 22nd, 2007. All board members are present. Would those giving testimony tonight please rise to be sworn?
Please raise your right hand. You and each of you do solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in the matters now pending before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you.
Tonight we're going to be hearing the petition of the City of Simi Valley, petition number 790. Petition representatives of the petitioner, I assume, are seated to my left. Good evening. Could you state your name for the record, please?
Hi, I'm Joe Deacon with the City of Simi Valley.
Mr. Deacon, if you would, please tell us your job title and present your petition.
Okay, I am the Assistant Public Works Director for the City of Simi Valley. And our petition is to allow us to continue using our Detroit diesel engine for not only emergencies for which it is permitted, but also for use during interruptible power service agreement that we have with Southern California Edison, for which it is not permitted. The reason this generator does not meet this permit is because the particulate matter discharge exceeds the permit limit of 0.15 grams per brake horsepower. We are aware that it does not meet this requirement. We have been aware of it, but we are asking for your consideration of a variance so that we can take the time to replace that generator. And we have already put out for bid a replacement generator. We do have money budgeted to purchase the generator and have it installed. We have found a replacement generator that does meet the recently upgraded standard. In all other ways, we are willing to move ahead with our project to meet the compliance that our permit requires for this generator. And that's, in general, what I'm here to present to you in terms of our request. Would you like me to answer any questions? Or
Have you had a chance to review the petition submitted to the APCD?
Yes.
And can you tell us whether all that information in that petition is true and correct?
Yes, it is all true and correct.
With that, let me open it up to the board. Does anyone have any questions for petitioner? Not at this time, but we may.
Okay.
I'll ask a question. Could you characterize the particulate by size?
We have not been asked to do so. I don't believe we can.
District want to say anything about that?
Well, the particulate that would come out of the exhaust of the engine would be a very fine particulate in very small micron size. I haven't seen any data on the micron size of diesel exhaust, but it's quite a fine material.
Well, the smaller it is, the worse it is.
That's correct.
That's all I have right now.
Mr. Stubblefield.
Sir, could you explain to the board why you need until September of 2007 to install this best available control technology diesel? Because if you could get this done over the winter, it's not so critical because it's highly unlikely you're going to be asked to turn this on by ISO, whereas the likelihood that you'll be forced to turn it on increases as we get into the summer.
Yes. It really goes back to, and I believe we've been before your board before on September 11th of 2006 when we were seeking a shorter term variance, and I'll probably mix up the words if I try to use it, but we were seeking some shorter term allowance at that time to get through the next couple of months until our contract for interruptible service was expired and would come up for renewal. And what we testified to your board at that time, I believe it wasn't me, but someone else who briefed me, said that he had discussed with you at that time that the city was looking at the opportunity to budget and program a replacement generator, which would be brought before City Council for decision as to whether we would go forward or not with a replacement of that generator or a truncation of the interruptible service contract. The board, or excuse me, our City Council did decide to go ahead and fund program the replacement generator, at which time we began to write specifications and develop plans for the generator work. And we did advertise for that, and we did our first bid opening in, well, I don't remember the exact date, but it was in January. It was within the past 2 weeks. And when the bids were opened, we prepared to go to the City Council for award. And I guess I'm getting a little long-winded, but the bid, by putting together the bid package and bidding it in January, the time it takes to procure and install the generator, we had already thought that it would take us at least 8 to 9 months to do that. And that is why in November, when we applied for the variance, we asked until September of '07 for that work to be completed. So we're simply, I mean, on the timeline we are now on, we do need that time in order to complete our project. And the key part of it is, I guess, again, I apologize if I got sidetracked earlier, the key is procuring and getting a generator delivered has some lead time.
Thanks.
In one of the items that this board has to find is that during the period of the variance, you will reduce your excess emissions to the maximum extent feasible. Can you, on page 7 of the draft order, this item is discussed, and it appears that if you're called upon by ISO to operate, that you must honor that based on your ISC. And there are other health issues if you don't operate if the power fails. Have you reduced the operation for maintenance and testing to the maximum amount that you possibly can?
Yes, we have, and I appreciate that. Are you talking, I assume on page 7 you're referring to the clause 5?
I'm referring in particular to the last sentence under item 5.
Yes, I did talk to your staff briefly today about that particular clause. It is our understanding that up to 20 hours per year of maintenance is provided for under a typical application of this rule, but generally we use far less than 1.5 hours per month. We don't find ourselves maintaining it each and every month, and generally our runtime is far less than 1.5 hours. So to answer your question, can we mitigate to the best extent possible the amount of emissions we create? Yes, that is one means by which we will do that. We will maintain it by running it as little as possible to assure that it will be available when it is needed by the ASC.
Okay, I guess I would like to see this changed a little bit to, simply for clarity, and have that last sentence say something about operation of the engine for the purpose of maintenance and testing will be limited to a maximum. And that's obviously what's meant by this sentence. It's the operation of the engine that's limited to 1.5 hours. Not the maintenance and testing is the purpose, but that's not what's limited to 1.5 hours. It's the operation of the engine.
Right, for maintenance specifically, yeah.
Let's change that if we can.
You're on page 7.
I'm on page 7 of my printout. I'm not sure it's the same. And it's the last sentence under item 5. I would like to change to read, operation of the engine for the purpose of maintenance and testing will be limited. And I also have a question on item 6, do you have monitors, emission monitors, or would this be done by basically measuring runtime and estimating emissions through some factor?
We monitor the run times on an ongoing basis as an operational requirement. So reporting runtime hours is something we can do, and meeting its clause will not be a problem for us. We will also be able to extrapolate the emissions by discussing the power level to which we operated the engine, and we can extrapolate the brake horsepower to what the emissions were.
Well, in the material, I got the impression that the emissions just depended on the time of operation. Can you throttle this engine?
Yes.
And that then affects the...
Yeah, it affects the emissions.
So that's the basis on which you quantify the emission levels?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, we do not operate 100%. We operate at about 75%.
Thank you.
Dr. Hurlock, I have a question. If we're going to make that change, then on page 10, at the top, we're going to have to make the same modification as well.
So the change on page 7 should be reflected as well on page 10?
Yes.
Which paragraph? Oh, the first one. Any other questions of the board for the petitioner? No? In that case, does the district have any questions for petitioners?
Maybe just a couple. Mr. Deacon, I had discussion with staff member, I think, in the city manager's office last week about having to rebid the project because of I guess you might say a contest to the bid process. How is that going to affect the proposed schedule that we've laid out?
Yeah, as a little bit of background, that's accurate. There was a bid protest filed upon notifying what we determined to be the second low bidder of the award that we were recommending. Second low bidder protested. Our city attorney advised that there was sufficient ambiguity in our bid documents that the low bid evaluation was unclear and that we should rebid the project. So coincidentally, that decision is being made tonight. Staff did present an item to our city council that is on their consideration, on their agenda tonight, that they should cancel all bids that have been received and rebid the project. Assuming that we were going to award it tonight, which was our original schedule, we will need to renotice for award in the public plan rooms for 30 days. And we are looking at opening bids now in late February. And we will then schedule award of the bid at the next regularly scheduled city council meeting, which is March 5th. March 5th is 6 weeks from today. So by this protest and ambiguity in the bid, we've lost 6 weeks from our original schedule. And while we still think that if we can maintain a very tight schedule and everything goes smoothly, that we can meet the schedule we have provided to the board or to your staff previously. Therefore, we didn't formally request a time extension. I would admit that we have to be very tight with our time, and things do have to go exceedingly well for us to meet that September 30th deadline.
Considering the deadlines you were just talking about, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you, Mr. Duval. March, your next regularly scheduled board meeting is March? For
After
council meeting?
February 20th,
Oh, I see.
yes.
I think, like Mr. Stubblefield before me, I wonder why it's going to take till September, and you're telling us basically it's because of this rebidding and the ambiguity as discovered by the...
Well, that costs us 6 weeks, but ordering and getting a generator delivered is 90 to 120 days,
And this is a piece of equipment that costs approximately $500,000?
thereabouts, yes.
In the course of obtaining this generator, my recollection from September 11th is that, because I remember you were here with the city of Thousand Oaks on that day, if my memory. But yeah,
Some other
Simi
excessively good-looking
Valley
gentleman must have been here.
Must have been
1000.
that. And it was you, Simi and Thousand Oaks both came in, and Thousand Oaks said, well, we're going to stay on our ISO contract. And Simi said, no, we're not. What changed your mind? What was the purpose? What's behind changing that?
Madam Chair?
Yes,
I
did I
think
get
it was
that wrong?
just the other way.
Got it.
Yeah, that sounds more likely. I wasn't, and I apologize, I wasn't here, but I think he's right. We were thinking we were probably going to stay on.
Oh, okay.
And I do think Thousand Oaks has gotten off, I think you're right. But Thousand Oaks has gone into a cogeneration scheme at their treatment plant, so their whole landscape is a little different than ours.
So back in September, when we first did this, the first variance that we gave you, and you anticipated staying on this, I just don't see, and I wish I had brought that old file with me, but I don't have it, and if anybody has memory of what that was, I would really appreciate it. But my recollection is that it wasn't going to take a year to get this together. Maybe I was thinking, I mean, obviously I got you and TO mixed up, but I'm just trying to remember that we never would have given you a variance if we thought it was going to take a year. That's just not our board. We would have put all sorts of limitations on you, and now I'm looking at the September 30th date and thinking there's got to be some way to tighten this up.
Madam Chair,
Please.
my recollection was that they were here before November, which is the period, the time in which they make the decision to renew or not renew their ISC, and so they had not made that decision, or at least had not formalized it until November of this year. And this
Okay.
petition was filed about that, during the month of November.
Yeah, that's correct. At the time in September, we were just asking for a short-term variance through the end of November to give us time to make a decision whether to stay on or get off the contract. At that time, there was debate amongst our managers in the city as to which one we were going to do. We hadn't decided yet.
Okay. Any further questions of the district for the petitioner?
Maybe just a couple. And just to clarify the record, on September 11th, when the city of Simi Valley was before your board, it was the county of Ventura that was before your board with the Arroyo wastewater treatment plant, not the city of Thousand Oaks. So it was the county of Ventura. And the county made the decision, and I think at that time was heading towards the decision to get off of the interruptible service contract. And my recollection is that the city was still up in the air, and then several nights later, they went to the city council, and the city council decided to commit the funds for this project. And then they had to go out to the bid and go through that process.
All right. Thanks for that clarification.
Yes.
Sorry, my memory is so faulty tonight.
That's quite all right.
You said you had questions for
Maybe just for the record, questions for Mr. Deacon. If we understand that there might be a penalty, or there is a penalty that the California ISO would impose if you chose not to run the engine when they call upon you. Could you discuss that a little bit, what the cost might be, and if there's any way out of that?
We have a contract with Southern California Edison that within 30 minutes of their notification, we'll get off the power grid. If we do not meet that requirement of getting off the grid within 30 minutes, we are then charged a supplemental rate for the power we consume at the rate of $10 a kilowatt hour, I believe, is the rate. And because our plant operates at about 1,000 kilowatt hours per hour, or at 1,000 kilowatts, we would be paying on the order of $10,000 per hour of not being able to use the generator if we were called by Southern California to leave the grid. So it's not really a penalty, but it's a contractual obligation that we agreed to pay this extremely high rate if we don't comply with our promise to get off the grid.
Would that be a substantial cost to the city if they had to pay that one or more times in the coming year?
Yes. We haven't budgeted for it.
And as I understand from the previous discussion, you're willing to keep the operation of the engine down for maintenance and testing to below 1.5 hours per year, and probably or 1.5 hours per month, and probably less than that.
Yeah, usually, our typical maintenance is substantially less than that. So, yes.
Okay. And you're willing to provide the district with the number of hours from your meter readings on a monthly basis so we can calculate excess emissions?
Yes, absolutely.
Monitor the performance. Those are all the questions that I have at this point.
Does the board have any questions for the district? Start at this end. Mr. Stubblefield.
Yeah, I have just one question for the district. How much an hour will it cost in fines for Simi Valley to operate this diesel engine
I calculated
during this variance period? This engine, which is out of compliance, which doesn't comply with the particulate matter requirement.
I calculated the excess emission fee, and it comes out to about $431 per hour, or part of an hour that they operate. And we would be proposing, and I think the section in the draft order on excess emission fees would require them to pay this fee even during maintenance and testing and emergency operations.
That's pretty generous when compared vis-a-vis to ISO's fee.
That's true, yes.
Can I ask a question, clarification on that? You mentioned emergency. I believe that our generator is permitted right now to operate during an emergency.
Yes. We've proposed to calculate the penalty for emergency and maintenance and testing because those particulate emissions during that period of time, even for maintenance and testing, we feel would be excess emissions. Have the city gone ahead and installed a compliant generator at the time.
Mr. Gasparino?
Yes, that takes care of one of the questions I was going to ask, so thank you, Mr. Stubblefield. The second question is, would you please give me the date, if you happen to know it, Mr. Deacon, when the bids will be open in February?
We actually posted our notice in advance at tonight's council meeting late last week. I believe we set a bid opening date of February 20th.
February the 20th. And how long would it take, I would assume, your staff to review the bids and make a recommendation to council for a decision?
Our next scheduled council meeting is March 5th after February 20th, and that will give us sufficient time to do evaluation and present the staff report.
Yeah, the council meeting wasn't my concern. It was how long it was going to take you, so there's more than adequate time, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and is it common for the city council to receive requests and accept them if Public Works and that those types of organization ask for emergency council meetings for matters such like this, if you should miss the March 5th deadline?
So out of my experience, I have not in my brief time with the city of Simi Valley asked them to meet for an emergency matter, so I can't answer. I don't know. The city does have the power to meet on unscheduled basis, they could call an emergency meeting. I don't know if they would.
Well, I
for this issue.
would hope so in this case, if you can't meet that deadline, but it sounds from what you've said to the board is that you have adequate time to review the bids and make the recommendation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the board? Mr. Ehrlich.
I have a question or two for the district, and this is for, I'm confused a little bit by a couple of points in the documents we've received, and if you can extemporaneously, if not, apologize for not giving any notice for this question, kind of explain the relationship or differences between the DRP and an ISC and between the 0.15 grams and the 0.01 grams per hour per braking horsepower hour?
The grams per hour might be the easier part. The state regulation that applies to this engine, if the city was to try and, let's say, retrofit their engine to meet the emission standard and use the existing engine, they would be granted a 0.15 gram per horsepower hour particulate limit. But because they're installing a new engine after, I think it's January 1, 2006.
2005 is what it says.
2005.
Yeah.
They're then required, because of that, they are required to meet a more stringent emission standard of 0.01 grams per horsepower hour.
And the permit to operate will be 0.01?
Correct. The district has issued an authority to construct for this engine with a level of 0.01 grams. And that's the standard that they would have to meet.
Okay.
The question about a DRP engine, demand response program, and I believe those are the engines that get turned on when Edison gives them the phone call that Mr. Deacon described. When Edison starts going into the periods of potential brownouts, rolling blackouts, they call some of these operators to run their engines, and that I believe is what's the demand response program. Some companies are on an interruptible service contract, or ISC, and that's a program where they get a lower rate. Those companies get a lower rate. And when Edison says, we've got problems, they just have to shut down. And they don't have engines to start up, they just shut down. So that's the difference, and that's what a DRP engine is. They kick on in response to the Edison's request.
Do you know which of those programs triggers the $10,000 per hour?
I believe it's the demand response program. But even businesses that are on an interruptible service contract, if they don't shut off from the Edison line when they're called upon, they also get a penalty, but I'm not sure what that penalty is.
One other, this is I guess what I'll call a typo on the top of page 4. I think of the fourth line should have inserted so that it reads standard of 0.15 grams of diesel particulate matter per horsepower hour. Something's missing there, and I think
I see that.
Does that addition make scientific sense?
Yes.
Satisfying
it
the
does.
district? Okay, so we can add that as well. Mr. Stubblefield, you had a question.
Two more questions of the district, and then some questions of the petitioner. This is also a house cleaning item, but in this, not in the draft, but in this other thing that we got, this overview. On page 3, under the discussion, the second paragraph, it said the ATCM requires that the current engine shall meet a diesel PM standard of 0.15 grams per horsepower hour by January 1, 2006. However, the ATCM and District Authority to Construct required that a new DRP engine enrolled in an I-6 contract on or after January 1, 2005 shall meet the more stringent diesel PM standard of 0.01 grams per brake horsepower hour diesel particulate matter. One of these is horsepower and one's brake horsepower? I mean, are they...
I believe everything, I believe everything in the air toxic control measure and the district's permit is based on brake horsepower hour.
Not just simply horsepower hour?
Yes, correct.
Okay. My other question is, I know that Edison is going to build a peaking facility. I'm sure the district's aware of that, over by the Reliant, the old Edison plant at Mandalay Bay. And that, as I understand it, talking to the Edison PR guy, that's going to primarily be for the Oxnard Plain. But are they going to build a new natural gas peaking facility somewhere in Simi?
No.
That would obviate the necessity for this diesel anyway?
No. The only unit in Ventura County that's proposed is in the Mandalay area next to Reliance power plant.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions of the board for either the district or the petitioner? Yes.
Sir, could you tell us, during the variance that you were already granted, how many times did you have to turn this engine on? Any? I mean, besides for testing?
I believe when we met with you on September 11th, we testified that it had been used. If the date is correct, it was right around there. I think in July, we used it for an interruptible service contract.
So you did have to turn it on?
Right.
But that was before the variance was...
Before your last hearing on this issue.
That's
we have
when you
not
were
used
just-
it. Between the time we last saw you in September and today, the engine has not been used, even for maintenance.
Thank you. And historically, how many hours have you had to run this thing over, say, the last 5 years per year?
Our average per year is less than 6 hours per year. But there were some periods of substantial use, particularly 1999, 2000, 2001.
When we had the rolling brownout.
Yeah, and there were some emergencies in there as well. There was a fire. There were a number of things that happened, both interruptible service as well as emergency use, that were substantially more than...
So barring another scenario like that, you don't really
It comes down to
anticipate-
less than 10 hours a year for us.
Thank you.
In general.
Okay, this is, I think we have finished the questions from the petitioner. Of the petitioner, Mr. Duval, do you have any questions?
No questions, but just a comment. At the hearing on September 11th, with both the county and the city of Simi Valley, your board was really concerned about allowing a couple dirty diesel generators to continue operating forever, you might say, in the county, if they didn't take measures to reduce their emissions. The engine that the city will be putting in under their authority to construct will provide very significant reductions in almost all pollutants. The diesel particulate is going to be reduced by about 99%. Reactive organic compounds and nitrogen oxide and carbon monoxide emissions are all going to be significantly lower than what they are now. So once this engine gets installed and put into operation, it will be significantly cleaner than what they're running right now.
That was my imperfect recollection from the September hearing as well. So with that, I think we have questions completed from the board. I notice there are no members of the public here, so we can call this hearing closed. As far as discussion by the board is concerned, I am going to focus on the 6 findings that we have to make in order to grant this variance. The first finding, that the petitioner is in violation, is or will be in violation of Section 41701, is something I think that is not in question after the testimony here today. The second finding, which is reflected on page 6 of the draft order, under paragraph 2, I would like to propose to the board that we amend that to strike that first paragraph talking about reasonable control of the petitioner and unreasonable taking of property, to instead substitute the paragraph in the code talking about when the petitioner is a public agency, the hearing board shall consider whether or not immediate compliance would impose an unreasonable burden upon essential public service. I think under the circumstances of this case, and in fact the staff report reflects this, that it is that paragraph which is more applicable in this order. I'll finish a couple more of these and then we can discuss what the board wants to do. The third finding has to do with whether the closing would be without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. Mr. Duval's last comment may have most appropriately addressed that issue, that when this is finally completed, it will result in a significant benefit. That the applicant for the variance has given consideration to curtailing operations of the source. We have discussed that here today, and we can take discussion on that as well. During the period of the variance, which is the fifth finding, the applicant will reduce excess emissions to the maximum extent feasible. Again, there's some discussion on that today, so I'd like to hear from the board on making that finding. And then finally, that the applicant will monitor air quality emissions, and that clearly is within the ambit of the draft order. So there are a couple here that are without question and a couple that I'd like to hear the discussion of the board on. So if anyone would like to address these issues, please speak up.
Your comments on item 2, I found the same inconsistency, but not being an attorney, maybe we could ask Mr. Oriano. It appears that these are just sort of built into the state law, and striking these words sort of leaves us not making a finding that's in the law. I agree that this finding is totally irrelevant to this case, but it appears the question is, can we just strike it?
Finding 2 in the statute in Health and Safety Code section 42352A, 2A and B capital has B as an alternative, which is for the practical closing and elimination of a lawful business. But it says in there that if it's a petitioner is a public agency, the hearing board shall consider whether or not requiring immediate compliance would impose an unreasonable burden upon an essential public service. So it's an alternative finding even in the code. And I believe at the last board meeting you did that. You made that same change. I don't think there's a problem with dealing with public agencies, and it's probably a direction you could just give the staff to bring it in that format for now on for public agency.
I agree. I mean, it's clear it is a public agency and it is a water works. Those two things are covered. The water works is listed
in the definition.
In the definition. So
and I think that we could also make the finding without too much trouble that requiring immediate compliance would impose an unreasonable burden upon an essential public service, or at least that's my idea here.
Yes.
So then I would suggest that as we move forward on this, on page 6, paragraph 2, the first paragraph of that section, that be modified to reflect the alternate finding that Mr. Oriana has just spoken about. Mr. Stubblefield, do you have comments?
Well, I don't know how the other board members feel about this, but it seems to me that the district is charging bargain basement prices in terms of its fines with respect to this particular violation, and it would be nice if they could beef up their fines a little bit. And $10,000 from ISO for refusing to turn it on, and $400 odd for turning it on. it would be easy if I were on the city council in Simi Valley to have made that a decision on what to do strictly in economic terms.
I'm not sure that we have the ability to inform the district as to what fines to impose. However, we can certainly provide our thoughts and directions.
Comment noted. It does take rulemaking to make that change, and we've been reviewing a number of the fees and hearing board fees and a lot of issues in our hearing board rules and fee rules.
Please, please.
The reason I bring this up is because I'm thinking if there was more of an ouch factor here, the Public Works Department and the City Council in Simi might very well decide to develop a greater sense of urgency in this matter and get this thing installed more quickly, perhaps before we get to smog season and possible rolling brownouts.
I agree.
Mr. Herlock.
Yeah, I just didn't I won't say rebuttal, but it hardly seems fair to charge a city waterworks a different rate based on the amount of pollution emitted than Platform Grace or somebody else who has a diesel engine.
I'm speaking generally here. I'm not picking on the city of Simi.
Oh, no, let's pick on the city of Simi. They're here. And he seems so good-natured about it. In any case, Mr. Gasparino, do you have any comments? Dr. Shackman? On paragraph 3, page 6 again, closing the business or taking the property would be without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. I would suggest that we can make that finding, as well as the next two, that the applicant has given consideration to curtailing operations, and that during the period the variance is in effect, the applicant will reduce emissions to the maximum extent feasible. With those comments on the 6 findings, of which we've been directed to be more careful, we would ask whether or not any of the board members would like to make a motion on this petition.
I move that we grant this regular variance to the city of Simi Valley as modified.
If the board's okay, I won't repeat all the modifications we made, but I think Chris got most of them at least.
Second.
Okay, clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Gasparino?
Aye.
Dr. Shackman?
Aye.
Mr. Stubblefield?
Aye.
Mr. Herlock?
Aye.
And Chair Nicewinder.
Aye. Well, thank you, sir, and your petition's been granted.
Thank you very much.
With that, and without any further public comment, our full board meeting tonight. Mr. Duval, do we have anything else coming up?
We had tentatively scheduled a hearing, I believe, for February 26th, which was to be a product variance for marine coating. It looks like the company is going to withdraw their petition. And at the last, just a bit of information since the discussion of penalties came up tonight, with the City of Thousand Oaks and the Hill Canyon wastewater treatment plant that was discussed at the last meeting, we had cited the city for failing to maintain records and exceeding their annual rolling 12-month gas usage. And we ended up settling the notice of violation for $3,500 with them for that violation. So did have the ability to take some further action on that later on. And with that, that's all we have.
I have a request of, I'll say the district, but I think that Mr. Ariano might get involved. I would like to, I continue to have difficulty in this case with the finding number 8 on cases like this. And it just isn't, and my difficulty is that this petitioner is being allowed to operate out of compliance, which means there's more diesel particulate matter than would if they were forced to shut down. And And the ARB has found that there may not be a safe lower limit to diesel particulate matter. Those two things butt up against each other in my mind, and I don't know, I have difficulty with that finding. And I would guess I would like an opinion either from the district, from the district's council, from the board's council, and if we can't get it any other way, maybe from ARB. But maybe I'm the only one who has that difficulty, but the ARB Scientific Review Panel has found that there may not be a safe lower limit for diesel particulate exhaust, for diesel particulate matter. It's a safe exposure limit.
But it's not I agree with you 100% that I would love a clarification from either council or from the ARB. I think that's a great idea. However, I'm not seeing that as a legal finding that we're required to make. Am I?
It's a finding that we just made tonight.
Pardon me?
It's a finding that we made tonight, number 8.
Right. But under the code, under 42-352, we're not required to talk about that particular finding. Am I right or wrong?
Maybe Mr. Duval can comment on that. These last two findings are 7 and 8 are not part of the 6, but we continue to find them.
Right. 7 and 8, the findings 7 and 8 that are always in your draft orders or the orders that your board adopts aren't specifically called out in 42-352 of the Health and Safety Code. They're not one of those 6 findings, but the Health and Safety Code requires that when a variance is granted, a nuisance will not occur. And so that's where we get number 8. Number 7. I'm sorry, thank you, number 7. And then number 8 comes from a finding that is in our rule number 123 of the district rules and regulations, and it's rule 123 section 8, and it says that that continued operation is not likely to create an immediate threat or hazard to public health or safety. So that's for years and years, that's been kind of a self-imposed finding, I guess you might say. And I think it kind of goes along with the nuisance issue.
So if we could boil this down, and Mr. Herlock, please correct me if I'm stating this right or wrong, the matter that we need clarified by either county council or the ARB is, can we make this finding when the latest science is saying that any increase in particulates is a danger? Am I correctly stating your concern?
I believe you are. My concern is that we're granting a variance that puts more diesel particulate into our air than if we did not grant the variance. And that extra diesel is more than zero. And the ARB has said that may be above.
Anything above zero is a potential
They are
hazard.
unable to find a lower safe exposure limit.
Got it.
So that's my quandary.
But isn't that what that paper that the district gave us along with the other documentation for this case about?
Doesn't address it. All right. In that case, if that doesn't address it, then what is the board's pleasure? Do we want to direct county council to come up with an answer for us?
I guess I would like to get some guidance before we see another one of these diesel engine cases. That's my.
With one other clarification, my understanding of the rule is that, and the previous explanation of staff has been to underline the word immediate for a reason, that in number 8 in Rule 123, it says the continued operation is not likely to cause an immediate threat or hazard to public health and safety, and that the finding in 8 says that, and this is staff's recommendation as to the finding, but then says that there's no acceptable known level. And the other issue that's come up in the cases so far has been that you have a public entity with other issues involved, like sewage not being treated and other immediate threats, and you've weighed one immediate threat against another unknown and maybe not immediate threat. But I can certainly work with staff and with staff's counsel to come up with further explanation of that. But I have thought that so far they have underlined that word to say that you are making that finding, because they're not saying there's an immediate threat from this diesel particulate.
Well, this, I think Dr. Shackman challenged this immediate a while ago, and I have the same problem. If there's no safe lower limit of exposure, immediate, that's immediate. Whether you doesn't show up until you're age 60, or that's not the issue.
If someone's being exposed to it, I think that's right.
So the problem with the problem with any diesel variance could be that you can't make that finding.
That's where I'd like some guidance. Yeah.
Even if it's 0.01.
Well,
using that logic to taking it all the way out.
Well, we're allowing extra diesel by this variance tonight, and that's my concern. That potentially,
For a period of time, we are in fact doing that, yes. Well, with that direction to staff and to council, if we can get some information on that at the next hearing, I think we can adjourn the meeting. We will do so then at 6:25. Might as well get it cleared up before we even know these ones. I mean, I don't see.